Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have reached the appointed hour, so I would be very pleased to wish you all the best for the new year and to welcome you to this morning's Housing and Communities Committee, which since the Council decision last month now has a revised remit. At the full Council meeting of 20th December, decisions were taken with regard to a review of the Council's political decision-making structure. And with regard to this committee, it was agreed that Housing and Communities remit would be expanded to encompass additional areas of service delivery and that the responsibility for the oversight, scrutiny and challenge of these lies with us. The full list of responsibilities of the committee are as follows. All areas pertaining to housing, community safety, crime prevention, emergency planning, road safety, together with liaison with Police Scotland and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and operational issues in relation to equalities. Although the remit of the Strategic Policy and Resources Committee currently includes determination of the Council's policies to fulfil its statutory role in relation to community planning, the responsibility for the oversight of the implementation of those policies, and particularly the further development and implementation of community empowerment legislation, will sit with the Housing and Communities Committee. In April 2017, the Council endorsed the findings of the Perth Kinross Fairness Commission, and a specific part of that responsibility is oversight and development of the action plan to implement the Commission's recommendations, and that too will sit with us. Can I also remind members of the committee and everyone here present that recording of the meeting for webcasting purposes commences today, but that recordings of the proceedings by any other devices or persons is not permitted. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest with regard to today's agenda? Okay, are there any apologies and substitutions?
Councillor Williamson standing in for Councillor Tom McEwen.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Anderson for Councillor Pover.
Okay. Councillor Band. Thank you. We have apologies from Councillor Illingworth and from Councillor Coates. So, no other substitutions? Right. Can I ask the committee to approve the minute of the Housing and Communities Committee meeting of the 1st of November, and for myself to sign the minutes? Thank you. Councillor Williamson.
Yes, before we get started on the full agenda, Councillor Barrett, is about the business case impact analysis. These papers came out late last night, which I think is quite ridiculous. It gives very little time for folks to actually read through these papers.
Councillor Williamson, can we deal with that when we get to that item on the agenda?
If you like, yes, by all means, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay. Item 4 on the agenda. I'm very pleased to see before us, as equalities now forms an important part of the committee's agenda. I'm pleased that we can mark and acknowledge the award-winning work and success of the team behind the Men in Childcare project, which won a silver award in the Council's Securing the Future Awards in 2015 and went on to win at the Scottish Public Sector Awards 2017 for championing Gender Equality Award, recognising PKC's efforts to tackle the gender imbalance prevalent in the childcare workforce and to encourage more men to consider a career in childcare. I'm pleased that we have Susan Johnston here today to give the committee a short presentation on the Men in Childcare project and the success of the training courses and outcomes achieved. Thank you very much. Can I invite Susan to give us the presentation? Thank you.
Good morning. I've been told I have to use the the microphone, otherwise you won't hear me. My name is Sharon Johnston. I'm the head of early years and primary, and I'm here just to introduce Susan, who's the team leader who is responsible for the Men in Childcare project. The project was born in 2014, and that was when John Fife, who was the Executive Director of Education and Children's Services at the time, and Sheena Devlin was the Head of Service responsible for this project. And since 2014, it's been a really good collaboration within Perth and Kinross and Perth College. However, Susan has been the person who is the founding member and the person who really has driven this project forward. She's going to just give you some outline of the rationale as to why the project came into being, and also to give you a wee brief overview of the impact of the Men in Childcare project within early learning and childcare, and also to give a bit of an understanding about what we're doing in terms of next steps. So with no further ado, I'll introduce you to Susan.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to the committee for asking us to come along and share this presentation and share the work that we've been doing. We all know within the sector that men bring huge and significant benefits to working with children and young people. We know that they bring a different skill set, and we know that their approach is very different to working with children to those of some of our female staff. Okay. I wanted to illustrate that to you, but you can't see that.
If it would help, then I could sit. Oh no, is that? Oh no. As the committee is aware, previously we varied the order of the agenda in order to take the police and fire service reports, the operational updates in private, then followed by their performance reports in public. I was going to say that we might leap to that, but having filled in the void, I'll now pass back to Susan.
Okay.
Hopefully you're
Absolutely. So what we've said is that men bring a different perspective to our childcare settings. We asked a group of men, we gave them some straws, construction straws, and asked them to create something. This is just no ordinary house. I sound like a Marks and Spencer's advert, but this is a south-facing, 3-bedroom, detached property with a garden feature, a sky dish, and not just a garage, it's a triple garage. Now, the group of men that did this came from a range of different backgrounds. We had a glazier, we had a labourer, we had a gardener. So you can see that they've used their experiences to bring that to the activity that they did. And this is the diversity that we would like to see, creating different experiences for children in our settings. So with that, and with knowing that our sector was underrepresented in terms of the male workforce and all the research that goes behind that, we came up with the Men in Childcare project. Now this project, we had as our aim and the background to this was to encourage more men into childcare and address the gender imbalance. We wanted more men to give a positive role model to children, and we also wanted to promote positive images of men in childcare. So what we did was we approached Perth College and we asked them if they would like to help. We said we would like to create a bespoke course, and this bespoke course was to involve an element of training, accredited training, and also an element of fun and networking for these men. So our first course, and we've run it 3 times now, our first course was Perth College did the training. They did the PDA, which is a Professional Development Award in play work, and that comprised of a child development unit, a play unit, a legislation unit, an additional support unit, and also a practical element. So these men would go into Perth and Kinross settings and work with children. What we did with the second half of the session was we provided the opportunity to play 5-a-side football. Now, this course started in January, and as you can imagine, not all men wanted to go out and play football in January. So this fell by the wayside, and we continued with the training element. This has evolved over the 3 years that we've been doing it. We now provide one of the play units, we provide a hire in child development, and we also provide that placement, which is crucial to let these men see if childcare is for them. We did have a range of different men applying, and you'll be surprised by the list I'm going to share with you. As I say, we've had a labourer, a gardener. We've also had a foster carer, a cleaner, a speech therapist, a social worker, a manager, a foreman in a factory, a community warden, musician, geologist, and 6th-year students. I just wanted to share, we have a couple of men here who are going to, we've obviously videoed them to let you see how they came to the course.
I was volunteering at my daughter's nursery. A teacher, a few weeks into it, spotted me and was like, "This is fantastic. Do you know about this course?" And it was her that informed me about it. I phoned up that night and I got asked to come along. Well, I'm from a building site background. I did go from someone wondering what I was going to do next, and fortunately and luckily enough fallen into something that I enjoyed doing. I loved the course. I thought it very informative. It was good to meet like-minded males on the course. And at that moment in time, it was, I can just say it was a lifesaver for myself. It just changed my life, you know. Well, I went on, I got myself a job in a kids club, part-time, while I worked towards my SVQ level 7 children and young people in social services. I've experienced negativity from parents. They found it weird, a man being in the workplace, which is a very women-dominated area. But all in all, I will say most of the stuff, a lot of it has been positive.
Outside and doing forest school activities. So here's
the main
getting to
reason
this.
why I took the course because at that time I just wanted to build up my knowledge about education. I wanted to start this course because I hear that a lot of men going to study this course again, so it's a bit different. I think the course was really great. I felt like I'm going to the tea room to meet my friends where the topic was education. I also really enjoy because we had an opportunity to try yourself in the service. Perth Kinross Council offer for that, and it's really great because you can see if you want to work with kids or you don't. At the moment I work in the after-school clubs of Perth Kinross Council, which I really enjoy. What's the plan for the future? I think the kids is our future. So what I want to do, I want to deepen my knowledge in this field. I want to study more.
Yeah, that was Ginteris, and he's obviously now working in one of our services as a peripatetic play assistant. We couldn't interview them all, but I just wanted to run quickly through some of these men that have taken part. So we have Graham. Graham was working in the playgroup. He completed the course and now he's working as a pupil support in the Blairgowrie area. We have Javier. Javier has come from Tenerife. He was our speech therapist. He's now working around in Navigate as a pupil support. We have Ryan. Ryan was our modern apprentice, admin modern apprentice. He has completed the course. He now does supply work to fit around his admin work. We have Dan. Dan was the geologist. Dan has finished his men in childcare, and he's now gone off to do his postgrad in teaching in Aberdeen. Now, the beauty of our course, he's been able to secure placement within our Perth and Kinross schools. We have Neil. Neil was is a musician. Neil now works as a a play assistant in one of our early learning and childcare centres. And we also have Hamish. Hamish is our community warden who now does supply work for ourselves as well as the job he's doing. And he also has applied, and I think he's been successful in one of our new initiatives called Learn to Be an Early Years Worker. So it really has been positive for these men. The men in childcare really has been a stepping stone. But over the last 3 years, we've had 28 men take part. 18 of these now work in a professional capacity, and 9 of these men have gone on to complete their SVQ level 3, which means they're practitioners and could work in any of our early years and childcare settings. One has applied, as I say, to be Learn to Be. We have Dan there who's done his teaching, and we also have another gentleman, Greg, who was a postie, who's now applied to do a postgrad as well. It's not just the men that have enjoyed the success of this. Children have told us too that they really enjoy it. They like men challenging them, they like that it gets them, they like that they're being listened to, and they really see these men as role models. Parents also have told us that they really like having men in the setting. And this was apparent, the quote there about the company, they do more creative work. It just backs up some of the research that we're hearing. As I say, at this stage, it really is about the individuals. But I think the course has helped them to build up relationships, both professionally and within their peers. It's given them the confidence and the support to go on and do other things. And as Gary said earlier, it really changed his life. In terms of us as employers, there are 384 early years workers. 9 of those are males. So you can see we still have a long way to go. There are 7 of those 9 working out of school care or with school-age children. They tend to feel more comfortable there. The children are older. They can take part in sport and other activities. But we do want to try and encourage more men into the early learning and childcare setting, particularly with the expansion that's coming. As Councillor Barrett said, we were successful in our Securing the Future Award, and we also went through to Scottish Parliament in December to pick up our Scottish Public Service Award. Ultimately, the men are the winners, but so are the children, and us as employers too. So here's what the children have told us.
Stuck with something, will always be there for us because he's a really amazing guy. Gary's awesome and he makes cakes with us. Gary always respects us and he always plays with us. Gary is very funny and he's an amazing drawer. I love Gary very much and I wish he was here forever.
Okay, we'll miss Ginterus out, but the children equally love Ginterus too. And one of the comments that they told us was, and he's Lithuanian. So our next steps are obviously to upscale. We're making tiny roads into this at the moment. To upscale in terms of numbers of men attending, but also numbers of times we may run this. We want to promote the Men in Childcare course. You may have heard our radio advert. We have posts on Facebook, we have leaflets and information out there, so we are going to upscale that too. We also want to use the images that we have of men and use them to promote the men as role models. And in terms of next steps, as I said earlier, the workforce in early learning and childcare is expanding, and we need more childcare workers. with half a population, we don't just want to target women, we want to target men. Otherwise, there's a huge miss there. Thank you. Do you want questions?
I was going to ask whether any of the members of the committee had any questions for you, Susan. So, did any of the committee have any questions for Susan about the project? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. First of all, thank you very much for that presentation. I think it's excellent work and it's very welcoming to see. I'm just wondering if you have what happens next after this initial initiative, and if there are any aspirations or plans to carry this on further, and what sort of timescale do you have to get more of a gender balance in the workforce in that sector?
Okay. How we see the project, it used to run for a year. It used to be the national progression, which was 5 units plus a placement. We're now only doing 2 units because what we feel is that we want to give them an introduction. We want them to feel nurtured, supported and confident. And ideally, we would like these men to go and train and take up SVQs, take up HNCs with the confidence and knowledge that they're really good at this and they're valued as members of staff. I think ideally we would like to see more men coming into childcare. I think there are other things we need to factor too. We want them to go on, but not only to do SVQs. Some have gone into teaching, some have gone into social work, some have done other activities, but we are wanting to upscale. 2020 is our deadline for implementation of the early years in childcare agenda. So we need to pull our socks up and really get out there and promote this course.
Thanks for that, Susan. Are there any other questions? In which case, I just thank you very much for your presentation. I think that the work you're doing is extremely valuable. I think the diverse range of meals that you've brought into childcare is to be commended, as well as bring in further positive meal roles for children. So I think it's a very worthwhile project. I know the next cohorts start next month, so I wish them all the best as well. Thank you very much. In accordance with the now established practice of our committee, can we agree to change the order of the agenda as I referred to earlier, to take private items P1 and P2, being the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service operational updates now, and then resume in public session to consider items 7.1 and 7.2, which are the performance reports from our police and fire and rescue services. Can we agree to that order of the agenda? Thank you very much. Can I ask that all members of the public and press leave the chamber? Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for that. As I said, item 7.1 is the interim performance report from the local senior officer of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. I'd like to draw members' attention to the fact that this is an interim report covering the period of the 1st of December to 3rd of January, and that the full quarterly report in its new format will be presented at our next meeting. It is good to see that fire casualties and non-domestic fires are at the lowest level for the past 5 years, and that the same holds true for false alarms, with a notable incident happening on the opening of the Perth pantomime and an impromptu appearance by firefighters assisting members of the cast back onto stage, which drew a tremendous round of applause. There was more serious public engagement to deliver key safety messages in the run-up to the festive period, with a stall stationed at the St John's Centre, staffed by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, our community wardens and Police Scotland. Billy, can I invite you to speak to the report?
Thanks, Convener. I wasn't going to go down the theatre one, but I'll just take you to page 68 of your papers and just draw you to section 4.4. That's now obviously the agreed priorities in the local fire plan, so all the reports will now start to line up to that. If you look at section 5, it gives you a total number of incidents for the reporting period, which was from the start of December to the 3rd of April, so it is a very short time span. We had 185 incidents in total, and you'll see the list of incidents there, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it's also, please note that these figures are not in statute until the end of the reporting year, so they can fluctuate. If you go to page 69, that just gives you a graph of the top 10 incidents that we attended over the period. which I'll talk about. If we go to section 5.2, deliberate fires, over the festive period that these numbers have stayed low, which is historical for us locally in Perth and Kinross due to the good work that we do with our partners. Of the incidents we have, they were all low-level incidents as well, which are basically just either rubbish fires or out in the open rather than being building fires. Moving on to accidental fires, the reporting period reflects an increase of around 27% for the reporting period. However, note that those numbers are quite small, and the fact if we look at the Q3, which we'll be reporting on in a couple of months, there's actually a decrease in those numbers over the quarter. So although there's an increase over this festive period, over that quarter reporting period, there is a decrease. Accidental dwelling fires, we've seen a spike in December of the number of accidental dwelling fires we've attended. However, pleasing to note that the majority of these incidents, they all had fire alarms or smoke detectors fitted, which allowed to give them early warning in case of fire. So of those 22 fires, only 3 of them were what we would have called significant incidents, i.e. the fire went past the item which was first ignited, so it obviously caused damage to the room or floor of the premises. The main cause of the fire was due to cooking, 50% of them, which is historical, and we do tend to keep working on that from a community safety point of view. If I take you to page 70 now. Very pleasing to note, as the convener has said, that fire casualties are on the continual decrease. So over the festive period we had 1 fire casualty, and the only reason they went to the hospital was because they were quite elderly and they took some smoke inhalation. So it was more a precaution, so that's very pleasing to note over the period. Moving on to non-domestic fires, which are commercial premises, again very low numbers, and this festive period is the lowest we've had over the last 5 years, so very pleasing to note that. Moving on to special services incidents, there was 36 over the reporting period. The majority of these, as you're probably aware with the time of year, are road traffic collisions, which is where most of our casualties come from over that period. So we had 12 casualties, no fatalities in road traffic collisions. The remaining special service calls generally are medical related, so it's about gaining access to people's premises because someone's either fell or collapsed, and also supporting other agencies at incidents as well. We had 3 casualties in that special service, other special service type incidents, and 1 fatality. Pleasing to also note that fire alarms or false alarms are starting to reduce month on month. This is just now with all the hard work we're doing with the premises and occupiers, so that's very pleasing to note. 5.3 on page 70, there's not really any notable operational incidents I'd like to bring to your attention. However, I would just like to highlight that any incident does have an impact on people within our communities, so just want to register that point. Notable community safety activities, so if we go to page 71, we have started doing an annual community safety event as a partnership approach in St John's Centre, so we set up a stall or get a vacant premises in there over the festive period and do a wide array of community safety activities about home safety, Christmas safety, festive safety, etc. So that's just mentioning that. Further down there is about the Princess Trust, which is led by our police colleagues. We support that by bringing the youths into Perth Fire Station and do a day with them about being a firefighter. And the whole thing about the Princess Trust is about developing youth within our community, so it's a really good event. Further down the page, we continue to provide a number of educational events to numerous groups and community members within Perth and Kinross. We do have a national partnership with the British Heart Foundation around CPR and first on scene training, and the numbers we've got for that across the year are over around 1,500, so we will continue to deliver that, and it's an excellent initiative. We also continue to do various home safety events, and that still continues over the period. Moving on to page 72, we also continue to work to reduce the fire risk over the festive period. So for example, there you'll see if there's any materials that are lying around that we could foresee are being a risk, we get them moved very quickly, and we work very closely with the community wardens to get that piece of work done. And probably finally, or second last, I just want to note the fact that the fire service nationally have a partnership with the Anthony Nolan Foundation, which obviously involves partnerships working with local schools, secondary schools locally, to identify volunteers for the Anthony Nolan Trust. It's been very successful in Perth and Kinross, and I get a lot of really good publicity around that, so it's an excellent event. And probably the last couple of things is the Cedar project, which we're now starting to train some of our firefighters who are volunteers for the Cedar project, which is about working with families that are vulnerable within Perth and Kinross. So as the months and years progress, we'll hopefully get more people involved in that. And probably just the last one there was just to mention the fact that we facilitated the Scottish Flood Forum at Perth Fire Station again, which is about bringing in the communities and the people who sit in different flood forums just to talk about flooding and how we can build a bit of community resilience into the communities. There's nothing more I would want to say about the report, Convener. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Billy. I just want to touch upon comments that you made previously. I think it is extremely reassuring to us as a committee, and I'd like to make that known more widely, the proactive and preventive action that the local fire service have taken in the wake of the Cameron House fatal fire to check similar type premises in our area, and therefore, you know, we can all rest much more assured on the chances of something like that happening in our area being reduced. So thank you for that. Are there any questions for Mr. McClintock? Councillor Band.
Thank you, Convener. Billy, have you been involved in any way with the local authority in fire suppressant systems in social housing, i.e. sprinkler systems? I know that we've had the opportunity in the past to include sprinkler systems in new builds, which we have failed to take up, where there was a very good demonstration in Angus of how efficient that can be.
Probably over the last, well, since I've been in post here over a year now, we've been in constant dialogue with the housing, with part of Perth and Kinross Council, and obviously suppression systems will be high on that agenda. So we've done some excellent work with housing, and probably post Grenfell. Pleasing to note, and I think it's okay to say this, that the council have agreed and are committed to putting suppression systems in social housing anyway. And obviously we've got that bill that's now out for consultation, so we do work with the council, and particularly housing, quite closely on that. So there is an agreement to now move a commitment from the council to fit suppression systems, particularly to the social housing, as part of the new build project.
Could I ask Claire Miller to expand upon that?
Yeah, I mean, very much as Billy's just said, a decision was taken by our senior management team probably a couple of months ago, reviewing sort of our approach in terms of new builds. So a decision going forward, we're factoring that into our new build programme for new builds, probably ones sort of immediately coming on site that won't have already been factored into the new build specification, but for those going forward in the future, that has been the case. We're working very, very closely with Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and Billy and the team, and certainly we'll be taking sort of national advice and guidance in terms of the outcome of the consultation, in terms of then retrofitting for the multi-stories. We have got an extensive fire safety action plan which has been ongoing within the service for a good number of years. So over and above the physical measures, there's a lot of practical measures in terms of our tenancy management arrangements, ensuring that tenants are aware of their responsibilities, how to sort of be safe within their homes, and we work very closely with our locality housing teams and indeed the Fire and Rescue Service. But absolutely, in terms of the consultation, we will feed into that, and like every other local authority, any of the outcomes from that we will factor into our capital programme going forward. And also sort of as part of some of the national picture, we work very closely. I sit on ALACHO, which is the Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers, and we have regular contact and discussions about what's happening on a national basis, do benchmarking and share good practice sort of across Scotland on that.
Thank you, Councillor Band. No supplementary, or yeah. Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Convener. It's about the community safety stall that you had in St John's Shopping Centre. I'm wondering if you're looking to develop that sort of stall into more rural areas, and also using taking on the drug and alcohol team as well.
Yes, we look at every opportunity to push out the word about community safety, particularly around fire and other home safety issues. So yes, we do a lot of that in the sort of outside Perth area as in the county. So if anybody's got anything they wish to discuss or progress, please get in touch and we'll look at that, yeah.
I'd be very grateful for local members' support in arranging those sorts of events on a wider community basis, and for increasing awareness as a consequence. So good.
Specifically, I was looking at about the run-up to Christmas, Billy, trying to encourage a more community safety message, especially around drinking alcohol, etc., drinking, etc. You also mentioned cooking fires too. Have you got any specific timings on when they're occurring? Are they occurring around about tea time, or are they occurring just throughout the day generally? Is there a spike when people are coming home from the pubs?
I can certainly get that detail to you, but on recollection, it's generally around 10 a.m. in the morning and around the run-up to tea time around 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. But I can get that more detail to you, but that type of analysis we do on an ongoing basis. So what we do is we look at a monthly, quarterly, 6 monthly, 9 monthly, and then over the year, and then historically to see where the fires are, particularly in the home, what time they're arising, what day of the week they're arising, so see if we can identify any trends. That's probably where our national strategies around the media come around, Christmas safety, cooking safety, that kind of thing. So we look at that quite closely.
I think, Councillor Williamson, from my recollection of the previous report, which did highlight the times that cooking fires occurred, I was kind of surprised that there wasn't a kind of midnight to early hours in the morning spike, but that the busy periods did arise at sort of standard tea time and late breakfast time. So, but certainly that's available in the previous reports. So, are there any other questions? Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning.
Morning.
It's just a question back on the subject of false alarms. I know they're time consuming for your guys, and I just wondered, do you ever find yourself going back to the same place? And the second question, is there any way you can encourage people to have their equipment serviced, particularly non-domestic sites?
As you're aware, our activity around mobilising incidents, 60% of that's generally around false alarms. We work very closely with the people responsible for the premises to try and reduce that. We have a national strategy about reduction on that over the next few years, which we're working on just now. Each premises we have triggers, so they meet first trigger, second trigger, third trigger, then we'll work with them to a point where we'll send out our fire safety experts to work with them more closely to try and reduce those. If not, we would then look at other measures we need to potentially think about. But we work with them very closely, and generally within Perth and Kinross, the numbers that have multiple activations is a small number. It's generally one activation, because obviously even when our crews go out there, they actually engage with the occupiers and try and do that conversation around reduction as well. So,
thank you very much.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Convener. Questions on the charts on page 69, and well down the chart, but however it's there. Chimney fires, 3.78%. Is there any indication that that's an increase?
No, that's just a seasonal thing, time of the year usually when people start using their, obviously, fires, and obviously stoves are now coming into that quite a lot with your wood burning stoves, etc. We are starting to see a slight increase in wood burning stoves, but that's probably only related to the amount that's probably getting bought and probably put in people's houses at this point.
And when there's safety advice given out, when you're promoting home safety, is wood burning stoves, because of the rise in the use of wood burning stoves, is there any advice given? Because most of these chimney fires will be because you haven't cleaned your chimney.
Yes, we have leaflets for chimney safety, stove safety, so that goes out. We do that all the time, but generally on the run up to this time of year when it gets a bit colder. So yes, we do have all that information.
Are there any other questions? No? Okay. Can we note the report? Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we move on, I would like Billy to say a few words of appreciation to work that Colin Grieve had done as our previous local senior officer Colin was somewhat vague as to when his last committee meeting might be, and I don't know whether that was so that he could, avoid a "this is your life" type valedictory speech. But I would be very grateful in Colin's absence if he would take back to him our best wishes to him in his retirement, and thanks for his contribution over the years to reducing fires and fire-related injuries and fire deaths in Perth and Kinross, to the excellent collaborative work that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have contributed to locally through the Community Planning Partnership, and his leadership of community safety themes in particular. So thank you for that.
I think if memory serves, Colin actually indicated that last meeting would probably be his last, so he has put his apologies in today. We'd like to have been here if he can, but he's on his last few days before he retires. From my point of view, when Colin came in, he's almost been here 3 years. His depth of knowledge and experience in the fire service, particularly around fire safety and community safety, was enormous. He spent a lot of his time working nationally with government groups, etc., on community safety, fire safety. So that knowledge and expertise he brought to Perth and Kinross was absolutely second to none. And I think working with Colin over those 3 years and the differences he's made within Perth and Kinross has just progressed us on that bit further than the last or the previous LSO. So Colin, in the 3 years he's been here, has absolutely progressed everything that we've done. And I think from a partnership point of view, his working or partnership ethos behind ourselves, and particularly by Colin, has been second to none in Perth and Kinross. As you probably know by the partnership working we do locally, it's very, very strong. So Colin's been excellent here, and I'm sure we all wish him the best in his retirement, which probably leads nicely on to Gordon coming in to replace Colin, who comes from the similar type of background working in community safety or prevention and protection, as we call it, as a national service. So we look forward to Gordon coming in and pushing on even further. No pressure.
No pressure, exactly. Thank you very much for that, Billy, and we look forward to working with you as well, Gordon. Thank you. Item 7.2 is the local policing area performance results from the 1st of October to 14th of December. Notable items in the report are the arrest following significant seizure of 7 kilos of cannabis and the recovery of 19 cannabis plants in a separate investigation. I'd like to ask Chief Superintendent Graham Murdoch to speak to the report. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Convener, committee members. First of all, I would just like to say that the report that's been presented to you lacks the statistical information, and again it's due to the dates at which the meetings fall and the constraints of our systems in being able to generate the quarterly information. The narrative within the report is absolutely valid for the reporting period, which of course is Q3. And if you haven't got any questions in relation to performance generally, we'll certainly be able to give you some generalised responses to that. Just before I ask Inspector Kevin Chase, who's the South Perthshire and Kinross Locality Inspector, to present the report on behalf of Chief Inspector Ian Scott, just a couple of observations from myself. I'd like to add my own comments really in terms of the community's vote of appreciation and Billy McClintock's words in relation to Colin Grieve. Colin Grieve has been an excellent partner and colleague to Police Scotland locally here in Tayside for the last few years. I've worked closely with Colin in response to weather incidents, other emergencies and events, and indeed in terms of other matters, particularly in relation to resilience and major incidents. Colin's been a pragmatic, down-to-earth, really capable colleague, and has been largely responsible with his senior management team for excellent local relationships with Police Scotland and other partners. So again, I'd like to add my appreciation there. Billy mentioned in his report our Prince's Trust programme. We actually complete the second Dundee group this afternoon, but December saw the completion of the first group that we did in Perth in conjunction with the police and Prince's Trust. Grateful to the fire service for the part they played in that and for the support, and I'd like in this forum to express my appreciation for the convener taking time to come along to the presentation event, which I know the young people really appreciated. I can take questions on general matters at the end, but first of all I'll ask Kevin to take you through the highlights of the report. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Convener. The report is dated from the 1st October to the 14th of December, and it covers the local policing priorities, of which is putting victims at the heart of what we do, tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, protecting vulnerable people, and maintaining public safety. In terms of the actual report, I'd just like to highlight a couple of items that we've actually delivered over that reporting period, crimes of note as well. As you're aware, hate incidents are reported to Police Scotland due to the nature are investigated robustly, and we see them as a priority as well. I'm here to report on the 7th of October there's a hate crime stalking incident which took place in Octorada, which happened over a long period of time, involving a particular victim who was female and also was targeted because of her disability and what they believe is a sexual orientation. As a result of our investigation, 2 juveniles received warning in respect to this incident, and I'm pleased to note that there's not been any further reports involving this particular female and any of the young people that were involved in that particular incident. If I turn to the tackling crime and antisocial behaviour section of the report, I'd like to highlight a couple of things. South Inch in particular, I know some of the local representatives here have got South Inch as their area. We've had 2 walkabouts with local councillors, head teachers, youth services and safer community wardens, as well as a community team for ourselves in relation to foot patrols that have been carried out in this particular area, and frequent dialogue is maintained with these partners. We have noticed some reduction in calls. However, I also note that some of the local representatives have expressed some concerns now in regards to the Moncrief Island and allotments area in particular. I can inform you that we are arranging meetings with some of the owners of the allotments in that particular area to try and see if we can tackle some of the issues that are now seem to be up there. In relation to the prison at Perth, there was 36 crimes that have been reported in that particular period. I know that one of the local members asked me earlier about this, 13 of which relate to drugs and 2 were serious assaults. What I need to say about this, we are working closely with the prison. We might find an increase in some of the crime reports there in terms of the intelligence we receive in operations that we do take place. There's also a change in our accounting procedures as well, which I think has been previously reported by Chief Inspector Scott, and how we actually report and record our crimes, which may mean that one particular incident may lead to 3 crime reports, but it's actually that one particular incident took place. So that's the reason why you might see these figures as being quite high. In terms of housebreakings, there's some good work as well in the reporting period. 31st of October, a male was arrested for 2 housebreakings in Perth, one of which was a victim was an 84-year-old male, so it's quite pleasing to note. And also on the 10th of November this year, a local foot pursuit between 2 officers and the perpetrator for approximately 1 mile, which I can tell you wearing a stab vest isn't easy. However, over 1 mile led to 1 male being captured by the officers, and as a result of that, he's now been reported for 9 crimes in total, as a fact that we've actually caught the person involved. On the 6th of December, a significant incident took place in the Blairgowrie section, which led to police negotiators, a dog section, in regards to a male who was threatening serious harm to himself. I'm pleased to say that after a lengthy operation, this male was arrested for this particular incident and prevented further damage to his own property, to himself and to neighbouring properties as well. In terms of protecting vulnerable people, I'm pleased to say that community policing team down at Kinross continues to hold surgeries with the Kinross High School pupils. These surgeries are designed to, one, to break down barriers, but also to gain some confidence with young people speaking to the police officers. There, as a result of this, it was disclosed that one, a particular individual from Kinross, who's known to my local officers there, has been trying to gain access to the school. This individual is a former pupil. He's been notably warned regarding to his conduct, shall I say, and he's not been appearing at the school since that. Some other incidents of note, if I can turn over to page 8 on my document, which is officers in the Breadalbane area were made aware of controlled drugs being dealt with across the community. Intelligence provided that school children are possibly accessing these drugs as well. When we get information suggests it's involving school children, we act on it promptly. As a result of this, proportion operation was undertaken. Small recovery was made, and a police report by the community team has been made to the children's reporter. And also, we need to know that this local high school staff were really excellent in relation to that and supported us throughout that operation. In addition, as a result of that operation, what we find, it can lead to other operations and more intelligence coming forward. And as a result, drug search warrants were craved and executed in a wider community as a result of this information, and 2 other people reported in relation to drugs offence as regards to that. Maintaining public safety during the reporting period, and police note that the Sunday 12th of November, in regards to the several remembrance parades across the whole of Perth Kinross, and police report there were no incidents of any adverse incidents coming to our attention as a result of Remembrance Sunday. On the 22nd of November, local community officers assisted with a Monica de Glen viewing at the Breadalbin Academy. This event passed without any incident, but what I highlighted a letter of appreciation that we received from the wider community in relation to that regards to our officers attending. This was greatly appreciated. In terms of roads, tragically there have been 4 fatalities on the roads for the reporting period of up until the 14th of December. On the 12th of October, a female who was originally reported as a high-risk missing person was found deceased in a river near Aberfeldy within her own vehicle. It was quite tragic events for all involved. 26th October, a male motorcyclist was killed on the A93 near to Gilton. 27th November, a female was killed near to Ayliffe. And tragically, my condolences are passed to yourselves because I'm aware of this one, is a Friday the 8th of December. A 77-year-old female and former councillor was killed on the A9 between Killicranky and Blair Athol. And that concludes my report, Convener. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much for that, Chief Superintendent. I'd like to express, my appreciation of the work that both yourselves and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service are doing in terms of early intervention and working with young people, the Prince's Trust Award scheme, and the work that you're doing with the YMC with a group of vulnerable people who, had kind of embarked or gone down the road of risk-taking behaviours, crime and antisocial social behaviour. I think was really valuable to see the growth in confidence of those young people, the way that they expressed themselves, the better social skills that they'd developed, as well as other life-saving skills that they'd gotten on a number of courses with both yourselves and the police. I think made a real difference to those young people, and I think the work that you're doing with secondary school pupils as well is very important in terms of that early intervention and prevention. Before opening up to questions, I wanted to ask about the announcement that was made in December last year, that Police Scotland were increasing the number of officers trained in the use of tasers to 500, and I wondered what that would mean locally in terms of what circumstances officers would be issued with tasers and when they'd be deployed locally, and would there be officers conducting routine duties with tasers as well? So I wonder.
Yes, I can answer some of those questions, perhaps not all. There is a working group which has been specifically formed in Police Scotland to look at the rollout and implementation of further issue of taser as it is known. I think the key point to point out is that there is significant precedent for this, particularly south of the border. There are many English police forces who routinely arm frontline officers with taser as an additional measure of dealing with violent offenders if appropriate, and indeed for the protection of officers. And I think by and large that's the point to emphasise, that this is for the protection of officers who still unfortunately right across Scotland on a daily basis face significant danger and often physical assaults, often of some severity. A taser is not a firearm. A taser is, well, it's called an attenuated energy device. Most of you will be familiar. It works on the basis of electric current. But the key point is it is not a firearm, although our firearms officers do routinely carry taser as a less lethal option than a standard firearm. So again, I understand the public will always have some concern about the rollout. But again, there will be strict controls around the deployment and use. The officers who will be appointed to carry these tasers will receive in-depth and very specific training. They will be fully conversant in what is necessary and proportionate in terms of the use of force and in terms of their decision making as to when it would be appropriate to use a taser against an individual. One of the advantages of a taser is, of course, it has slightly greater range than the Pava spray that officers routinely carry and often use, again, for their own protection. A Pava spray requires fairly close proximity to an individual, which can often mean that an officer is still in danger, and often it's the reason for the deployment of the Pava spray. A taser has a slightly greater range, which will enable an officer to deal with someone, a violent individual, perhaps in possession of a weapon, in greater safety. There are very, very few incidents in the UK or elsewhere in the world where taser has been routinely used, where there have been adverse or significantly worse medical effects. Those cases have existed, but they are very, very few indeed. The safety of the public is something which, of course, is paramount. In terms of the actual rollout, the conveners pointed out the rough number across Police Scotland. The numbers are proportionate to the size of divisions. There are financial matters which constrain, so this is really a kind of phased rollout at the moment, and the financial aspect at the moment determines the number of officers who will receive taser and the number of deployment hubs from which we will deploy those officers. So, for example, in Tayside, we will train between 40 and 50 officers, and those numbers are based on 2 officers being able to deploy on a 24/7 basis from what will be 2 deployment hubs within Tayside. The rationale that I've applied to that is that one of our deployment hubs will be in Dundee, and that's just simply due to the urban nature of policing there, the demand and the significant number of incidents, and it gives us an additional capability. On the basis we were only allowed to have 2 deployment hubs in Tayside. The second I elected to have through in Angus, in Arbroath. The rationale for that, as opposed to Perth and Kinross, was firstly, both Dundee and Perthshire do have routine 24/7 armed response vehicle coverage, which of course includes a taser capability. There are no armed response vehicles routinely deployed on a shift-by-shift basis in Angus, and indeed the profile of assaults against police in Angus is such that my view is there is a rationale for having an additional capability for the protection of our officers in Angus. We are, as an organisation and locally, probably about midway through a recruitment phase. Officers are applying to be taser officers, so it is on the basis of application and volunteers. We are not forcing this upon anyone, and I think that's important because officers need to be willing to take on the extra responsibility that this will entail. So, as I say, the selection phase is ongoing. The training will then kick in, and of course all the physical aspects needed to actually kit out our deployment hubs to actually enable these officers to deploy. So hopefully that's given you some context and background and indeed some reassurance as to the rationale. The one bit I probably haven't covered, which the convener asked, is, well, what will the officers actually be tasked to and what does that look like? That's something that the organisation is working its way through at the moment. As I say, these are not firearms, therefore the command protocols and the controls we have around the deployment of armed officers do not necessarily apply, but equally we want to ensure that there are sufficient controls around it, particularly as it is a new departure for Police Scotland, to give the public and indeed our officers that reassurance. So at the moment, the organisation is looking at what those command protocols and controls will look like. So I can't actually answer that question at the moment, but it's possibly in a future meeting we will have greater clarity. But those controls will absolutely be in place by the time we actually move to implementation and deployment.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's very informative, and I think moving forward, if we get sort of updates, as the rollout and the policies are developed, that'd be useful. So thank you very much for that. Are there any other questions? Councillor Drysdale, and then Councillor McCall and Councillor Baird.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks very much for your report. I was particularly interested in the section entitled Protecting Vulnerable People and the issues that you discussed therein. I wanted to focus on the issue, the use of police resources in dealing with a couple of cases that you speak of here regarding drug dependency and chaotic behaviour that you've had to address with a multi-agency support involving Murray Royal Hospital. You'll be aware that there are proposals to consider relocating general adult psychiatry services from Murray Royal to Carsview in Dundee, and there's an obvious issue there in terms of the time spent dealing with these cases. Can you comment on whether you consider that police resources are able to sustain the same level of support were a decision to be taken to move the adult psychiatry from Murray Royal to Carsview?
I think the general answer to that is, of course, we will do our very best to support colleagues in NHS Tayside. It will be no secret to members that vulnerability and mental health within the community do place significant demands on the police and indeed all other partner agencies, and it's important that we all understand what role we have to play in that. In some respects, the centralisation, if that's the right word, or the focus of resources to Carsview, we understand that's a matter for NHS Tayside, and of course we have had dialogue with them, and we have considered the implications of that for us. We have, within probably recent months, implemented what's effectively a pilot with NHS Tayside in terms of a triage system to assist our officers. I'm sure NHS Tayside would take no issue with the fact that on many occasions, and it will still happen in the past, officers have conveyed people who have not necessarily committed crime, but maybe have an issue of mental health or be in some kind of crisis, and we will take them to Murray Royal or Carsview for assessment. Absolutely appropriate that we do that. And often in the past, and for absolutely understandable reasons, that often involves officers waiting with that individual for what can be reasonable lengths of time. We are absolutely conscious that NHS Tayside do their best to minimise that, but they also have significant demand. The triage system that we're trialling means that there is a mental health professional, a consultant or a CPN who is available on the end of a telephone 24 hours a day. So through the assistance of our control room in Dundee, officers can actually, while they're out there on the street trying to assist an individual where they think mental health may be a critical issue, can actually provide details, even put that in on that individual on a telephone to that mental health professional, who can then, as we say, perform a kind of triage and either offer the individual advice and assistance, offer our officers advice and assistance, or make an assessment as to whether further treatment or assessment in a unit is actually required. The feedback from that has been really positive in terms of reduced officer time, probably better outcomes for individuals, and of course a process which involves a commitment from NHS Tayside, but collectively is reducing the demand on our resources, but still hopefully getting the appropriate outcome for individuals. So in a kind of long answer to your question is, yes, those demands are still there. A centralisation of efforts at Carsview no doubt will lead to further involvement of the police, and indeed the other aspect to that, of course, is when patients go missing from the establishment, which also involves police. But we are working very closely with NHS Tayside, conscious of the demands on both our resource, to try and reduce that demand, but make sure that patient care isn't compromised in the process. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. Thanks for that full response. Obviously, you have commented on the work that's been done to improve how we deal with these vulnerable people. But in stark terms, if I can just press you slightly on the single issue of the move of adult psychiatry from Murray Royal to Carsview, accepting that these other positive things are happening, would you accept that that would be an additional drain on police resources, the actual move itself?
I'm not entirely sure what the rationale is behind the point that you're trying to make, because in introducing measures to reduce demand, whether that demand comes across two different places or is centralised to one, the question probably is, it will probably lead to a shift in demand for offices in Dundee and obviously a reduction on demand for offices here in Perth, which is a positive thing for Perth. Beyond that, the full impact, I think we probably need time to actually understand that, and I'm very conscious that I don't want to stray into commentary on decisions that have been made by NHS Tayside.
Thank you. The decision hasn't been made, but thank you. Cheers.
No, I mean, I think as you said towards the end there, Eric, that it's a decision for the IGB. It's certainly an issue that I raised with the chief officer of the IGB when out of our services were relocated to Carsview, and I think in the meantime. The triage system has been introduced, which has certainly mitigated the impact upon officers transporting people through to Dundee and having to wait for them to be seen. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to look at the community policing teams that are in taking surgeries in schools. I'm assuming it's not just Kinross, that this would be across Perth and Kinross. And it's obviously had an increase in communication from members that attend the school. But is it also having any other knock-on effects that you could sort of share with us? Is there been any increase or decrease in youth hijinks, shall we say, or anything like that from this programme?
I'll maybe ask Kevin to answer that. He'll have more of the local context.
Yeah, it's a pilot we introduced at South Perthshire for Kinross initially. In terms of whether it's had any other knock-on effects in terms of reducing antisocial behaviour with police being perceived as positive role models, I can't say at this moment in time because it's too early. It's in the last few months or so that this has been rolled out. So it is my intention to have a look at it at the end of the calendar year, financial year, for the 1st of April, to look at rolling out across the whole of South Perthshire. That's what my intention is. Certainly at this moment in time, I'll say yes, I will be. I've already been in contact with Crieff High School. But that would be my intention, is certainly at this moment in time to look at rolling out to all the other high schools in South Perthshire and passing it on to my colleagues in Perth City and also for the Perthshire North as well.
Thank you very much. My question is to do with the Vulnerable Road User campaign, really relating to cyclists, because some of us who live in rural areas, we're quite often confronted in the evening or early morning with cyclists wearing very dark clothing, and you get quite a wee shock when there's suddenly this cyclist, particularly in a morning like this when the rain and the wind. Have you had any success with trying to encourage cyclists? I don't mean road racers, I mean people who are using cyclists to get from road bikes to get from A to B to wear reflective clothing, because they are actually very vulnerable.
I think probably the general answer to that is our colleagues in road policing, who do a lot of the education and enforcement, not only in Tayside but more broadly, will have regular campaigns in relation to vulnerable users specifically. They certainly in Edinburgh have done a lot with cyclists. Their road collision statistics are much higher than they are in Tayside. We're fortunate in that comparatively in Tayside, including Perth and Kinross, our percentage of road collisions involving cyclists are actually statistically much lower than other places in the country, which I think is positive. However, we can't be complacent, and I think it's understanding that much of cyclist vulnerability can be rectified by themselves. Proper lighting, appropriate clothing, and of course the manner of cycling itself. And that's obviously in conjunction with road users, particularly motorists, understanding the consideration that cyclists should be given as well. So there's that balance between the two. So we do have campaigns that are directed at that, and there will always be an education thing. But I think you're right. I see it myself, so I'm just speaking anecdotally, that there are cyclists out there who often, particularly at this time of year, longer, darker hours are probably not appropriately clothed, and we would absolutely do everything we can to encourage that.
Thank you very much, Convener. As one of the local members that went out and patrolled with your community team, I'd like to pass on my thanks to the team. It was a very informative evening, and especially with the numbers of police you have in an evening, it was an eye-opener. It was also interesting to find out the areas of concern in the ward that you had, which I wasn't aware of, and also vice versa. And I'd like to see it continue moving forward, where we can have regular evening patrols with them, so we can have an understanding of exactly what's going on in our communities that and the concerns that you've got that don't necessarily come across in briefings like this, or concerns we have when we're at community councils.
Yes, I've taken all those points on board. Yeah, I'll pass that on. I'm aware that we do often have walkabouts with members of the housing teams as well, to highlight other areas in terms of not just public space but also private space areas as well. But yes, I'll certainly be passing that on to him, Scott, when he comes back.
Convener, I just have a comment, Convener. Is that all right? Yep. At the last committee meeting, I brought up the attention that there was a sharp rise in vandalism in Blairgowrie, and I would like to comment that has now decreased. I'm sure there are still the odd incidents, but I would like to thank you and your officers for what you did. I'm sure the community itself will be very pleased at the sharp reduction, and just hope that you continue with the patrols in the area, because these things can suddenly start to rise again. So it's my thanks for that. On a personal note, I would like to say you have my full support for the issuing of tasers to your officers. I think anything that minimises the injuries to police officers who stand up to protect the public should be welcomed. My thanks for what you do and when you do it. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Convener. I'm going to go back to the vulnerable road user campaign that Councillor Baird adhered to. And maybe the comment I could make before I ask my question is that maybe our drivers in our area are better, and that's why there's not so many incidents here as there is in other areas. Who knows? But thank you. Me being one of them. The statistics here, I know they're national, but they refer to 642 road safety camera unit detections. I take it this is of bad behaviour by whoever to vulnerable road users. I notice that cyclists, as we know, are vulnerable, and there's quite a high proportion of cameras used by them nowadays, and in cars. And there's been some talk in the media about the use of cameras. If someone has a camera, either on their helmet or in their car or whatever, is that evidence that can lead to a prosecution? And should people that have that really be sharing them on social media if they are going to use them?
I think there is no doubt, there's a huge, surge in people installing dash cams, etc., within their vehicles, cyclists and motorcyclists, having GoPros, that type of thing. So, there is a lot of footage going around out there. Admissibility of evidence, of course, is a matter for the fiscal service. I think probably the simple answer to that is if the provenance of the recording is accepted to be sound, and it's accepted that it is the best evidence in a particular case, then I think it probably would be admissible and could be used in a prosecution. But it's difficult to comment in general terms other than on a case-by-case basis. But it really is about admissibility, the provenance of it, probably that chain of evidence, if that makes sense. Obviously, it's not helpful if recording was to be used for a prosecution, if it's already out there publicly online, because that, of course, compromises the prosecution and the integrity of the process. So the answer is no, it's not helpful for it to be online. It wouldn't rule it out being used, but we would ask people to consider that if they are coming forward to make a complaint, which they want to rely upon dash cam footage or anything to support it, that they would preserve the integrity of that to obviously increase the chances of that being admissible. Does that answer your question?
That's very enlightening, I'm sure. A lot of people take that on board.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Anderson. Are there any other questions? Can I just thank the police for the response to the vandalism that happened to the allotments and allotment holders on Moncrieff Island. I think the work that you've done to reassure the allotment holders has gone some way to reducing the impact of the damage that was caused to their property, and I think it's also worth commending the work of the Community Justice unpaid work team who have helped the allotment holders by transporting the new glazing across to the Moncrieff Island for its reinstallation, and also for the team who will be carrying out the work to rebuild the wooden gates that were damaged. So I think we're trying to set things right for the allotment holders. I think the increased patrols on the island are appreciated, and certainly the message that we're trying to get out to the public in the local areas to be vigilant if you see fires at the wrong time on the island or hear a disturbance, then to let the police know about it at the time and not the following morning when it's too late to actually do anything about it. But thank you. Okay, and I think that can we agree to note the report. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
I think, are our colleagues from the Fire and Rescue Service leaving now? Okay, thanks very much for your attendance. Councillor Williamson, you had a point of concern that you wanted to raise, so can I ask you to, with relation to item 5, can I ask you to meet your concerns now?
Yes, thank you very much, Convener. It's about the business impact case analysis, which I'm sure members received late last night, if at all this morning. I do have concerns about the lateness of the presentation of this paper. I suspect probably, like me, not many people have actually read it and given it due scrutiny. We are moving to try and encourage the public to try and get involved in the democratic process, and I don't see how we can fulfill that by having papers coming out so late.
Okay, I'll ask the director to respond to that, Mike. And firstly, I will apologise if members felt that they had a volume of papers dumped on them at the last stage and had insufficient time to either read them or digest them. What I would say before passing over to the director, that in the past these outline business cases haven't been issued to committee members, and they have only been made available after the committee decision. So we were actually trying to make sure that members of the committee had a personal copy of the outline business case, rather than rely on having to dig in a pile in the councillors' lounge for a copy. So apologies if you felt that you were meant to digest all of that information for today's meeting, because that certainly wasn't the case, and perhaps we should have made that clearer, but I'll let the director respond to your concerns.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed for the question, and it's the right question to ask, Councillor, in that I think at the time it seemed like a sensible idea that we'd put the business cases together and put them out for committee consideration, but we'll have to accept that the timing of these, I would not be happy if I got a dozen business cases the night before a committee to read through. So I'll just echo what the convener said in terms of, I think the idea was right, but we've got the timing wrong, and we'll have to take that on the chin. But one thing I would reassure you about is you're not being asked today to accept these business cases. If you go to section 11, you're not being asked to approve the business cases at all. You never have been. What you're being asked to approve is the capital investment, which then will add to additional
work in terms of external fabric, kitchens and bathrooms. So it's the financial part you're being asked to approve. The detail of how we go about doing that will come back to the needs assessment, the work that we've done with the tenants, their priorities, and how we take that forward. So as a service, we're very, very happy beyond this meeting today if in a week's time you want to come back and have an input into how these business cases are being developed to meet any or all of you at any time through our management system to deal with that.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation, Mr. Fife. I think, I'm sure it's right across the chamber that we all got various notifications from about 3:30 yesterday afternoon. And even though the original paper did say these things would be available, they weren't. And, you know, we're all quite conscientious, believe it or not, about what we do when we come to these committees, and we like to make sure we're fully briefed. So I think it would be helpful if these detail was brought back to the next meeting, or at least, or separately at least, so we have a chance to, you know, at least participate fully in this process.
Certainly, Councillor McCall, I've spoken to the head of housing, who said that she's very happy to arrange for briefing sessions for members, you know, either as a committee or if a convenient date can't be found, then, you know, to do that on an individual or small group basis. So happy to give you that assurance, and that will be carried out. So
thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Thank you, and I appreciate the diligence of members of this committee. I think since its inception, that we've demonstrated, I think, to other committees how to conduct our business and deliver proper scrutiny and in the way that we conduct ourselves in this chamber. So thank you for that. Okay, I'll now move on to introduce. Oh, Councillor Band, do you want to?
Sorry, Convener, not wishing to labour the point, but time-saving factor. Had I been able to read this paper, which I've got listed here as 4 of 10, Fire Precaution Works Programme, I may not have asked the question that I did earlier, this information, and it would have reduced the amount of time spent on the subject.
Point noted, Councillor Band. That's what you get for agreeing to sub for somebody, but obviously that's it. Okay. Paper 5 is the Housing Revenue Account Strategic Financial Plan incorporating the 5-year capital investment programme, the rent strategy to 22-23, reserve strategy and other charges. The purpose of the report is to set rent increases for our tenants, service charges for users, and an appropriate level of reserves to be maintained on the housing revenue account. What is critical to me in the setting of rents of our stock of 7,500 council houses is to ensure that the views of tenants inform the rent increase, that rents remain affordable for existing and new tenants, and that the rents can fund the capital programme for improvements and maintenance of our council house stock, as well as funding the investment in new council houses, improving the supply of council houses for the future, whilst maintaining borrowing within prudential limits, and making the standard delivery plan affordable and sustainable. The responses of our tenants clearly demonstrate that increasing the stock of council houses to rent remains their top priority. I'm very pleased that these views are shared by our tenants who responded to the consultation, and also for the clear lead that they have provided as to their priorities that they want to see the council as their landlord deliver on. Continuing to focus on energy efficiency so that tenants can enjoy warm, fuel-efficient homes with affordable energy bills, reducing fuel poverty and carbon consumption. Place and the local environment feature highly among our tenants' priorities and reflect both the success of the estate-based initiative programme and the desire among tenants and residents in localities to participate and get involved in having a real say on spending decisions in their neighbourhoods and in making a difference to their areas. A further increase to the estate-based initiative budget is proposed as a consequence. Repairs and improvements to stock also feature, and it is really great to see that at last, and I mean for as long as I've been a councillor, seeing a start to tackle the issue of noise from upstairs and downstairs neighbours, frequently not because of malice or bad behaviour, but due to difference of lifestyles, age, divergent working patterns, and due to poor sound deadening of the original buildings. There is 300,000 in the investment programme to improve sound insulation and deadening for our tenants, and that may be continued a small sum or considered a small sum when compared to the major investment in external fabric of £9 million, kitchen and bathrooms of £6.4 million, and central heating, triple glazing and energy efficiency works totalling £10 million, but it is a first step in the direction, and the lead-in time allows for full consideration of the potential to improve sound insulation, as well as tackling instances on a case-by-case basis. Tenants have been consulted on 3 rent options, a 1% increase, 2.2% and 3.5%, with the impact on the capital investment programme and the changes to the volume of the projects which could be delivered as a consequence. And the enhancement of the consultation process gave tenants genuine choice over these options. All tenants have had the opportunity to express their preferred level of rent increase. Workshops were held to discuss the detail behind the proposals, affordability, and how to communicate the information more widely with tenants. With the Scottish Housing Regulator's increased focus on affordability of rent, it is worth noting and drawing attention to the table on page 22, paragraph 8.3, which shows our favourable comparison of average rents with the main local registered social landlords in Perth and Kinross. Appendix 5 on page 47 also shows average rents in Perth and Kinross being the 8th lowest out of 26 local authorities in Scotland and below the Scottish average. I hope that this provides assurance and reassurance to members of the committee that rents will continue to be affordable for tenants with an average weekly increase of £1.45 per week. In general, the proposed rents for other services are proposed to be increased by the same 2.2% for lockups, chalets for gypsy travellers, dispersed temporary accommodation and garage sites, with a reduction in rent for Greyfriars Hostel to £57.69 per week. The garden maintenance charges are to be increased by £13 per year in accordance with the previous decision of the Housing and Health Committee to move to full cost recovery for the service by 2021. Paragraphs 10.4 to 10.6 summarise the changes for communal energy and service charges for owners and tenants, heating and lighting charges for sheltered housing tenants, and stair lighting charges. These charges are now adjusted on an annual basis to reflect the previous year's energy costs, and I'm pleased to see that this will see a significant reduction in the heating charge for residents at Lickley Milne and Market Court of £210 next year. The recommendations of the report will ensure that we as a council can continue to deliver on our affordable housing target to build 80 new council houses a year, that we continue to invest in the fabric of our housing stock, to provide high quality kitchens and bathroom renewals and modern efficient heating systems, and adapt our homes to achieve sustainable tenancies. I would commend them to you, and I'm very happy to open for questions. Do we have any questions? Councillor Drysdale, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Before I go on, my question is regarding the impact of universal credit. Is that going to be the subject of some further comment from yourself, or have we heard the report so far?
I'm not entirely sure that I follow your question, Councillor Drysdale.
Okay, apologies. I'll try and be clearer.
Okay.
I'm referring to the appendices to the report and the financial projections for the period 2018-19 to 22-23. Comment is made correctly about the potential impact of the rollout of universal credit in this area this year, and the probable increase in doubtful debt provision in 1920. And I note from Appendix 3 that the provision is to increase from, or proposed to increase from 3.5% to 5%. My understanding across England is that the incident of rent arrears, which I appreciate is not the same as just non-payment completely, is much, much higher than that. And across, there was a Freedom of Information Act request conducted by the Observer newspaper, which showed that across 100 local authorities, some 50% of tenants were in arrears when they were receiving when they started to receive universal credit. So I am concerned, in summary, that the 5% provision is nowhere near enough.
I'll ask the officers to comment on that level of provision. What I can say, and what I omitted to mention in my introduction to the report, I think one of the extremely commendable actions of the tenants was for the call to have a tenant sustainability fund, which is included in this report, and that's resources coming out of the housing revenue account to provide targeted assistance to people who find themselves in difficulty as a consequence of the rollout of universal credit. I think the experience that we're learning from other areas in Scotland, and I've said this before at committee, places like Highland Council and East Lothian Council, and also our own experience where there's been limited rollout of universal credit in Dundee, in Alloa, and I think in bits of Fife, where we have seen an increase in rent arrears as a consequence of people being put onto universal credit, is something that we are extremely alert to. We carry a volume of arrears already at present across the whole of our stock and all of our tenants. And I think we are conscious of the likelihood of that increasing, and have made allowance for that in this financial plan. I'm perfectly happy to ask both the Director and the Head of Housing to comment on the adequacy of that provision, which is, I think, central to your question.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not talking about just the initial rollout of universal credit. I'm talking about the fact that, as I understand it, that the funds are paid to the tenant rather than going to the landlord, and how we're going to deal with that.
Yeah, and I think it is about being ready to act once we're able to have direct payment made to ourselves. And I think, again, that's something that we are intending to be vigilant about. But
and so again, it's just
Councillor Drysdale, I'm trying to get an answer to your question, so I'll allow you a supplementary. Okay. Okay. Mr. Fife, is it you going first?
Yeah. Right. There was a lot of aspects to that question, Councillor Drysdale, as you'll appreciate, but I think I'll end up repeating a few things that the convener has said. I think certainly the analysis that we've done on universal credit through the councils in Scotland and in England and Wales, mainly in England, who have seen the rollout of this into full service, has been initially an immediate impact on two things. One's rent arrears, and two is council tax collection rates as well. And I think the committee will be aware that in terms of our council tax collection rate in Perth and Kinross, we're the third best in Scotland. Last year, I think we were the best in Scotland. And at the SPNR committee, you'll see a benchmarking report that gives you that detail. So obviously, being a prudent council and trying to forward plan, we recognise that we have to make allowances for these. And as the convener has said, the allowance that we're making here in Appendix 3 is for the increase in provision of bad debt going up to 3.5 to 5%. It's about £440,000. And a couple of lines further down, you will see that the tenants have agreed to the establishment of a tenant sustainability fund. Now, that tenant sustainability fund, if it's agreed today, is something like £150,000. Running alongside that, there's also the Scottish Welfare Fund that has about £480,000 specifically to assist those individuals who find themselves in financial difficulty. I think what we have to do as a council is ensure that the criteria for the Tenant Sustainability Fund doesn't overlap, if you like, the criteria for the Welfare Fund, so we can get as much bang for the buck in terms of investment going forward. But the third thing I would say is the fact that we've raised it from 3.5 to 5% in 1920, full service universal credit rolls out on the 1st of June. Now, universal credit has begun in Perth Kinross last April, but for a limited number of people. We reckon that from the 1st of June, somewhere around another 5,000 5,000 citizens in Perth Kinross will be involved under this umbrella of full service universal credit. So we've put the uplift in 2019-2020. What that means is by the time this committee meet next January for further rent setting, we'll be able to look at what the actual impact has been before any further allowance, if it is necessary, is made within the HRA proposition today. So it actually gives us a start in terms of making a provisional allowance, because we recognise it will go up, and then it gives us a chance to review that in 12 months' time when we have actual figures, and we can see what if at all, we can see what the bad debt provision happens to be. And then, of course, at that time, you'll have another opportunity to adjust the figures accordingly.
I think it's also worth emphasising the strength of our Rent First programme, making sure that tenants are aware that their rent is an important outgoing that they pay, and not the balancing figure at the end of the day. Claire, is there anything that you want to add to? No. Okay. Supplementary, Councillor Drysdale.
No, you'll be pleased to know that Mr. Fife has amply answered my question.
Okay. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Convener. My question relates to page 13. It's section 2.3 down the bottom there. We're informed that Perth Kinross Council's rents are between 18 and 20% lower than local housing associations. However, if I could refer you to section 8.3, the figures we're given there for Fairfield Co-op are in all cases within 5% of Perth Kinross's rental charges. So I just want to know what the basis was for the 18 to 20% figure, please.
Okay, I don't know whether that's an omission of the word main registered social landlords. I think Caledonia and Hillcrest are significantly larger presences in the social rented market than Fairfield. I think the historic origins of Fairfield Housing Association probably explain why their rent levels are much closer to ours than the other housing associations. But can I have a response on that, Stephen?
Yes, in section 2.3, that was the affordability model that Arneil Johnson carried out on our behalf, and that was basically against Caledonia and Hillcrest Housing Associations. They, as Convener said, they're the main players in our area, and that's what the benchmark was based against. You're quite right in terms of the table in section 8.2. That is all RSLs that have properties within Perth and Kinross, and that is taken from the regulator's database. So.
I think it's also worth commenting that the significant difference between our bedsit rents and Hillcrest Housing Association's bedsit rents, are something that we tackled through the review of rents, and our bedsit rents are now considerably lower than they were previously. So, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. As a substitute, this is maybe not the right paper to ask this question on, or it could be in some of these things, but we do have 7,500 houses, but we've also got a very small amount of them. I think it's probably under 100 now that are classed as hard to heat properties. But I don't see anything in this paper referring to hard to heat, and if we're maybe they've been addressed in the last year and there's not enough to be significant, I don't know. But it would be good to get an update on the hard to heat element that we have.
Certainly, a lot of the hard-to-heat houses, which were of the non-standard, either timber frame or solid wall construction houses, have been dealt with over the course of the previous council and into the term of the council before that. Through the HEAPS ABS Home Efficiency Energy something or other programme. And also in conjunction with work taken with Scottish and Southern Energy and their energy company obligation monies mean that we've been able to tackle hard-to-heat homes across both council tenure and private ownership and private rented. My understanding is that the HEAPS ABS programme will continue for the next year. I'm not sure whether we've had the Scottish Government allocation for next year as yet, but I'm looking to officers to see if they can add to that. And as to the quantity of hard-to-heat homes that there are now, I think a lot of them are now private or estate houses in rural areas as opposed to council or ex-council stock. But I'll seek whether we can get any. Right. Okay. And there is obviously mention in the report of the triple glazing programme and the central heating replacement programme as well. So, yeah. Claire.
I think just quickly to add to that, you're absolutely right. We have got a small number. We think about approximately about 50 properties, 50 council properties that are hard to heat. Within a very sort of tight definition of hard to heat, and you'll recall from our rent restructure report the previous year that what we did within that was for those small number of hard to heat properties had a lower rent for each of those properties of about £5 per week. And although that's not specifically mentioned within this report, that continues.
Thanks so much, Henry. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. I think the involvement of tenants in this way is a marvellous thing, but I noticed on 2.4 only 7% of tenants responded to the questionnaire. And I just wondered, is there any plan or idea to try and encourage more to respond the next time around, to get a more representative figure?
I think absolutely. And the next item on the agenda, the tenant participation strategy, sets out, and I'll come to that, but basically in a manner, identified and produced by the tenants, how they want to take that forward. So yeah, I mean, I think historically at the time of the large component replacement program starting, when people weren't happy with their kitchens, bathrooms, and central heating, then you'd get a lot of feedback from tenants in response to proposed rent rises and requiring assurance that those issues were going to be tackled. Given the progress that we've made on that over the past 10 years, then I think, and the progress towards the Scottish Quality Housing Standard, I'm not complacent about low levels of tenants' response, and we do want to see people get more involved and to increase the volume and therefore the authenticity of the response that we receive. So happy to take that on board.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Williamson and then Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. So it's about the housing and revenue count on page 31. I noticed that the transportation costs kind of flatline after 2018-19. There doesn't seem to be very much of an increase in that. Who's supplying you fuel? Could you tell me?
Is there any clarification that we can give on the transportation costs, Stephen?
We have no sort of inflation built in for sort of non-pay costs within the budget, and we review these budgets year on year. These are projections going forward, and what we're trying to do with mileage costs is trying to keep them down by making sure that staff utilise fleet vehicles that we've got across the service. So by encouraging them to use the fleet vehicles, we can sort of be as most efficient as possible across the board, both in sort of car, like personal mileage costs and sort of fleet vehicle costs. So the more fleet vehicles we use, the more efficient we are, and the costs sort of basically remain the same that we have built in there for the vehicles we've got.
Yeah, by using fleet vehicles, you're still going to have to pay for the fuels to operate them and run them. So therefore, I would anticipate that the cost of operating those fleet vehicles is going to increase. So therefore, there should be an inflationary pressure within this account.
I think a number of years ago we took the decision not to put an inflationary pressure across non-staff budgets and review them as part of our monitoring processes throughout the year. If these costs are going to go up, either sort of fleet vehicles or mileage, or indeed go down, then we'll review these by the time this report's here next year, and they'll be adjusted accordingly. I think it's the same across the board with any other budgets that we've got that are non-staff costs. Unless we've got specific inflation built into that, then it's reviewed throughout the year and adjusted accordingly for the next report.
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Braun actually asked one of my questions, so I have a small supplementary to that. The annual Tenants Conference, I'm just wondering how well attended that was and where it was located and if it was accessible to as many tenants as possible. But the main question really is on page 19 about the ex-council housing stock buyback. And I'm just wondering what is the pool of potential buyback properties that exist currently in Perth Kinross?
Well, I think the pool of potential buyback properties would be every former ex-council house, because the buybacks are of former council houses. So, depending on where we need the right type of house in the right location, and if it's available for sale, we will consider buying it. Providing it's within the budget that we have available, and we've accelerated the budget for buybacks in order to buy back more houses at an earlier stage in the plan, and we're continuing to seek additional funding from the Scottish Government to increase the number of buybacks. But I can ask officers to comment on that. And can you just remind me what the first part of your question was, which I don't think I was able to answer anyway. So.
The first part of the question really was sort of a supplementary to the tenant participation.
Oh, yeah, there were a number
really
of people at the
well
conference and the location. Okay.
And really, the second question was really just to try and get a sense of what is the ex-council housing stock that's out there, because I just don't know.
I think there's about, the original stock, was it in the region of 17,000? Yeah, okay.
Okay, in answer to your first question regarding the annual tenants conference, the event was held at the Salutation Hotel this year, and we had 2 events and approximately 50 tenants attended. So yes, in terms of overall numbers, we've got 7,500 tenants. Goes back to the earlier inquiry or the earlier question in terms of engagement. What I would say throughout the year, we've held a number of locality events throughout. We have a lot of other communication methods with our tenants via Twitter, online. What we did do following the conference, there was a lot of information in terms of some of the information today, in terms of tenants' priorities. We had some video clips of the conference, and we had a lot of interest in those. And I think over 1,000 tenants watched the video of our winter conference. So the reach actually was far wider than the actual attendance. All tenants were contacted both at the beginning of the springtime in terms of their tenant priorities through our On the House magazine, and then again more recently with our winter magazine in terms of coming back to us and giving us some details of their options. So they all received, every single tenant received the rent option form. And I think just in terms of tenant engagement and the presentation of the information, this is the first year that we've gone to tenants and given them 3 rent options. It is very complex information, and Susie and I attended with Christina the tenant committee panel a couple of weeks ago when they looked through the report, and the discussion that we had with them was very much along the lines as we're having today. How can we encourage more engagement? And some of that was round and about the complexity of the information. We presented information within this very much in terms of the percentage of rent increases, what we feel we'll do next year, and that was a takeaway message from our tenants, is actually to say what that actually means in monetary terms. So if this is my rent weekly, what does a 2.2% or a 1% or a 3% increase actually mean to me in the pocket? So we've got a few ideas in terms of how we can better present that information. And when we get onto the other report, there'll obviously be more detailed discussion about the menu of opportunities for participation. So going forward, that's one of our sort of key priorities, to sort of improve levels of engagement.
Okay, thank you very much. I actually think it's a great initiative and it's very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions or comments? Page 26, section 11 sets out the 11 recommendations of the report. I appreciate that's a substantial number of recommendations. Do you want me to read them out, or through your own due diligence, are you happy to agree the recommendations of the report? Agree the report? Thank you very much. The final item on our agenda today is the tenant participation strategy, paper 6, some of the issues about which we've already just touched on. Item 6 is the tenant and resident participation strategy from 2018 to 2021 and the Sure Team Service User Review and Evaluation Team Progress Report. It gives me great pleasure to have a tenant participation strategy presented to our committee today, which is the genuine product of Tenant's creation with an authentic provenance stemming from, firstly, Tenants and the Sure Team's expressed desire that they should develop and write the tenant participation strategy, which was respected and facilitated by officers led by Susie Burt. The development of the strategy in this way marks a watershed moment in the empowerment of our tenants, which take greater account of their views and priorities, as was demonstrated in the response to the priorities identified by tenants who fed into the previous agenda item and also this report as a whole. We have had many strong characters, leaders and dedicated servants of the previous Tenants Federation during my time as a councillor, and I'm sure that they would have appreciated how this strategy has come about. The Sure Team have conducted a rigorous analysis of tenant participation activities over an 18-month period, what worked well, participation levels that we've just discussed, and where events took place, mostly centrally and focused around strategic issues and scrutiny panels. From that, a menu of tenant participation opportunities and options have been produced, which describe to tenants the different levels of participation and commitment, and thereby being clearer about both the opportunities to take part and at a level that people are comfortable with. For me, it's also gratifying to see that the strategy was developed at one remove from the council, so there was no misconception that the council's fingerprints were all over the strategy. The tenants were supported by an independent tenant advisor who helped carry out a range of engagement activities with the tenants in the panel. The definition of tenant and resident participation set out in paragraph 2.6 of the report, to me, makes a claim of right to be involved in setting housing policy and influencing service delivery and tackling local issues from which there should be no return or no retreat, and which I fully acknowledge and support. I look forward to working with the Sure Team and tenants over the next 3 years of the strategy and supporting achievement of their outcomes and objectives as set out in this strategy. I think Susie has a video to show us there.
The Scottish Housing Act of 2001 places a duty on all local authorities and registered social landlords to prepare and implement a tenant participation strategy, ensuring that all resources are in place to support it. This strategy will enable tenants and landlords to work together to achieve the outcomes of the Scottish Social Housing Charter. Our existing Perth Kinross tenant participation strategy needed to be reviewed and updated, and to do this, Housing Services asked the Service User Review and Evaluation Team, the Sure Team, to take a close look at the work of the tenant participation team and how well it had enabled tenants to get involved. As a result of this activity, the Sure Team made a number of recommendations. Housing Services agreed to the recommendations, and also for the first time that our tenant participation strategy should be written by the tenants themselves. To develop the strategy, the SURE team, supported by their independent tenant advisors, listened and spoke to the wider tenant body about what new activities should shape the future of tenant participation in Perth and Kinross. From there they went on to write a draft strategy, again engaging with tenants, local registered tenant organisations and housing services to complete the final document. The new tenant and resident participation strategy is made up of 4 main sections, which cover the background to the development of the strategy, the legal and the policy context, the key principles of delivering successful tenant and resident participation, and the final section sets out what the strategy is trying to achieve over the next 3 years. Let's hear more about this from some members of the SURE team.
The tenant and resident participation strategy is about tenant and residents like myself trying to encourage other tenant and residents to get more involved in their area about what they feel is important. And the more they get involved, the more can be done.
And the difference with the new tenant participation strategy is that we're going out to localities so that local people will have a better voice in their own areas on local issues, which will improve, hopefully, the tenants' and residents' conditions.
By putting it out to localities, this means everyone has the opportunity to make their area a better place to live.
New strategy will achieve a lot, it'll encourage others to get involved and make things sound a lot easier to tenants and residents.
And by participating, people bring their own experiences, their skills and ideas to help improve council services.
It's important for the council to offer these opportunities to tenants because it will help tenants and residents understand more and give them a voice on all matters that are important to them. One of the benefits of getting involved are that tenants will have a say on many council topics by being part of a tenant and residents participation group.
And if approved, there will be a tenant monitoring group which will have 2 representatives from each locality reporting into a central group as an update of all that's going on within their own areas. This is not only open to the PKC tenants but residents in the localities and especially the younger age group who are our future.
And travel expenses will be covered too and care costs. So even if you're living in Kinlochrannoch, you're not going to be out of pocket.
To implement the new strategy, an action plan will be developed around its 5 high-level outcomes. We will continue to support people to be involved in strategic working groups, local tenant groups and tenant-led scrutiny activities, building on the learning and success of our award-winning tenant participation work. But we will change how the tenant participation team work with housing staff to take a locality approach to tenant and resident participation in the future. A key recommendation from the SURE team was to improve the way how council staff and tenants are able to demonstrate the difference getting involved makes to people, communities and services. They highlighted there was a lack of evaluation about tenant participation activities. To make improvements, staff will use the Learning, Evaluation and Planning Framework, LEAP, to record and report on the impact of our future tenant and resident participation activities. We will also form a new tenant and resident participation strategy monitoring group, which will enable tenants and residents to scrutinise our strategy activities and the budget to gauge if we are achieving best value for money. By implementing the new Perth and Kinross Council tenant and resident participation strategy, we will be supporting people to get involved in matters that are important to them and their neighbourhoods, building relationships with staff and building bridges in communities.
Thank you very much for that, Susie. It's quite an upbeat video, which I think will, if made available online, encourage tenants to get involved and give them an idea of what they can do. I asked Christina Stewart, who's one of our tenant reps, whether she wanted to make any comments, but she said that she was featuring twice in the video to make the points that were important to her, so you've already heard them. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Christina? I think, you know, sort of localism is what always counts, and, you know, people feeling involved in making a change to and addressing issues in their communities. I always think makes for greater participation. So thank you for that, and for emphasising the importance of delivering on the locality work that's envisaged in the strategy. Are there any other questions? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. I have a general question, really more about resident participation. Quite a lot of the focus is on tenant participation, and I can understand why, because we have good links and accessibility to Perth Kinross Council tenants. But a lot of communities are made up of a real mix of other social landlords, private landlords, and private owners of properties. So I'm curious to know how the residents part of the participation strategy will develop. And just another question, slightly unrelated, but I'll ask both at the same time, if that's okay, Convener. On page 61, you mentioned key objectives, but they haven't really been listed in the report. And I'm just wondering what the implementation plan objectives success criteria will be. And I understand some of this is still in development, but will it come back to this committee for further consideration? Thank you.
In terms of the resident involvement, that's a real major change for us. Our tenant participation strategy in the past has always been just that, tenant participation. Because of our estates are made up of such mixed tenure, the success of involvement and getting people involved, we really have to reach out to those people as well. So in our HRA areas, we'll be making those links. The SURE team recommendations also pointed out the need to link all our tenants and residents into local action partnerships to take into account empowerment, and as working as part of a stronger communities team, the tenant participation workers will be making those links with other wider groups to the benefits of those communities. That's the difference in including residents in the title of the strategy. So these activities will be open to all residents who are part of our multi-tenure estates, and we will obviously be working with other landlords around that as well, and partnership working. In terms of the objectives, there'll be the objectives will be covered in a 5-outcome action plan. Target dates, timescales will be set against that. The plan will be smart. It will be reviewed on a regular basis by the tenant and resident participation team, but it will also be reviewed, and this is a first, by a monitoring group that will look by tenants about the achievement of those outcomes, and reported back on a regular basis. We report every year to committee on the progress of the strategy, and we would do that also in the future.
I think the point that Councillor McCall was making was that only 11, if I'm counting correctly, of the 14 objectives are contained within the summary. So if we can sort of email around the members what the other 5 are.
They are in the full strategy document, and if the strategy is approved today, we will make sure that a hard copy is available in your pigeonholes and also emailed to you electronically.
Really just a supplementary. I think this is, like I said earlier, an excellent piece, but a lot of our casework and a lot of the issues that are raised are from tenants and indeed residents in these areas. So I think being able to keep members up to date with how the strategy is developing and what the criteria is for success and keeping us informed not just once a year, would be helpful, because then at least we can address concerns or direct any issues that are raised to us directly to the appropriate place.
I'm happy to, I mean, I think your members are engaged on an ongoing basis with officers, so if issues arise, then, you know, they will be dealt with, you know, so, okay. Right. Are there any other comments or questions? Can we agree to note the report or approve it? Thank you. Okay. Just before we close, it is worth noting that this will be, I think, Susie Burt's last meeting. Susie has been the leader of the Council's customer and community engagement team and has worked alongside and with tenants and residents in all my years as a councillor. And I would like, on behalf of this committee and the previous Housing Committee, to thank her for the contribution that she's made. So thank you very much, Susie, and we enjoy, or wish you the best in whatever your future holds for you. So, and as if there hadn't been enough valedictory speeches at this committee already, this is also going to be the last committee meeting for John Fife. John took housing and community care into his remit as Deputy Chief Executive of the Council when John Walker had to leave the Council suddenly due to ill health. I think it's very fair to say that John brought the same absolute commitment he has demonstrated through the GURFIC process to dealing with housing and health and leading fairness and equalities, and we're grateful to him for all that he's contributed here and wish him the best as well. So thank you very much, John. And thank you, members of the committee. Thank you.